Tonight, I'm pleased to introduce the Community Conversations on Police Use of Force report. This is an item that the Chief of Police, Bill Steele, Megan George, Sharon Lambos, and quite a few city staff has been working on, as well as the community. So there's a PowerPoint presentation tonight that we're teaming. It'll be myself, Megan, and Chief Steele. I'm assuming we're going to kick off with the PowerPoint presentation. All right. All right. So as you recall, the purpose of our conversations was to review our police department's use of force policies in light of feedback from our community and the national movement's call for police reform after the murder of George Floyd in May 2020. We went through a series of conversations that quite a few people attended, and we're pretty proud of the effort that the city put into to reach out to the community and hear what they had to say. Next slide, please. So tonight, if you have not looked at the report yet, the report is issued and it's online. We're gonna have, for tonight's points of discussion, we're gonna have an introduction to purpose, the process that was we went through with the three sessions, and the key takeaways from those three sessions that we heard from the community. Next slide. I'm not going to read this. Basically, why did we do this? We all know that with the murder of George Floyd, there's quite a social movement to review police use of force because of what happened at his murder. And many communities across the United States decided to look at their use of force policies and see what they could do to make them better, more reflective of their community standards, and make sure people were aware of what the police use of force was. The good news for our department is we have a very professional police department led by Chief Steele. Through the conversations, it was obvious that most of the folks, I should say all the folks who attended the community conversation sessions were very supportive of our police department, had very positive interactions with our officers, and did have some ideas that will be covered tonight. But I was very proud of, and I know our council is, of the respect our community has for our police department, because they are very community minded. Back in the day before COVID, we did have, our annual police event, the National Nights Out. At every social event that the city had, the police department was represented, and folks felt at ease to come into officers and talking to them and getting to know their officers. So the good news is we're not like a lot of different cities in the United States where there's a very rough relationship between the community and their police department. We're in a very good position where that is not an issue we have to deal with, but we do have to deal with one main issue that Chief Steele will get to. Next slide. So here are the four things. You've seen these slides before of, reimagining our policing pledge. So what we committed to was to review our policies, to engage our community in that review of our policies, reporting back out, which is the written report we have tonight, and this brief summary of that report. And if reforms are needed, making sure they get completed and approved and implemented by the City Council. At this point, I believe I turn it over to Megan.
That's correct.
All right. All right. Thank you, Megan.
Thanks, Mayor. So as the Mayor indicated, the step that we're at right now is the third step in the process, which is to report on the findings of our review to the City Council and to the community. So that's what this presentation is in part intended to do. So to detail our process a little bit, when we met and originally started talking about this, we wanted to make sure that we built in enough time to the process to really have good conversations in the ways that they needed to happen. And so for that reason, we chose to host 3 separate community conversations with a different purpose and agenda for each of them. We also wanted to make sure that we didn't drag this out over a long period of time. And so for that reason, we spread them out over a 3-month period beginning in October, I believe. With the third one wrapping up in December. So the timeline that you see on the screen, the first session occurred on October 14th. The second meeting that occurred was actually with the Diversity Task Force. We did reach out to 2 community groups to try to meet in spaces that they felt comfortable with and encourage them to participate in the process, but also hear their questions and their feedback along the way. Unfortunately, we were only able to meet with one of them, and that was the Diversity Task Force, which was on November 4th. The second session happened on November 18th, and the third session happened on December 9th. So I'll go in on the next slides into a little bit more detail on the content and agendas for each of those meetings. So the community conversations, as we branded them, there were 3 different meetings, each with its own agenda. The first session was a presentation from Chief Still and some of his staff. And the purpose of this was to provide an opportunity for the community to take a look at the use of force policies and get to know the police department overall. And so the presentation included a summary of department operations, law enforcement authority, the legal aspects of use of force, training, and the use of force data. As part of this session, we also had a short opportunity at the end of the meeting to hear questions from the audience. This was the most well-attended session with about 33 attendees. So the second session was scheduled about a month later, and the reason for that was to encourage community members to send questions, either that came up as they watched the first meeting or maybe watched the video later on, or as they reviewed the use of force policies, and then provide our staff enough time to take a look and prepare answers for those questions. So the second session was designed to provide answers to all of those questions we had received in between. So in total, in either via email between these sessions or during one of the 3 sessions, we received 53 questions from the community on a variety of different topics. We documented each of the questions that were asked, and you can see that in the appendices to the final report. And then, of course, the third session was our listening session. And so the idea was that people had had a chance to get to know the department a little bit better, ask their questions, and then they would come to this session prepared to provide comments. So this session had about 24 people in a total attending, and we had an opportunity for open-ended feedback and responses to 3 prompts that were provided during the meeting. Those prompts also appear in the final report. So we did not record comments made during this meeting. However, we did record all written comments that were provided throughout this entire process and following this third session. In total, we received 38 written comments from 27 different people. So throughout this entire process, we had over 55 different people participating in one of these 4 meetings, whether they were a community conversation or the diversity task force. If we add in the written comments that we received from social media or via email, we had closer to 75 to 80 different people participating in some form in this process. What we saw along the way is that we had a lot of people who attended all 3 sessions or who popped into 1 or 2, but we also had new people attend that third session as well. So as I mentioned, the Diversity Task Force was one of the groups that we had reached out to. So the Diversity Task Force is a community group. We have a staff liaison, Betsy Rodriguez-Roof, who manages that group. The meetings are held in Spanish, and they talk about a variety of topics related to community engagement. So this was one of the topics that they approved to appear on their agenda, and Chief Still visited with them. They had several questions throughout the way. Our new library community engagement specialist, Immer Honorado, was able to facilitate and translate during the meeting, and he shared some of these example questions with us. So how can you ensure use of force is only used when necessary? How do you approach policing predominantly white communities versus more racially diverse communities? And then is there anything local police Tualatin can do in case of an ICE raid? Immer also shared that following this meeting, he heard feedback from the group that this was a good opportunity to build trust, and that they also had expressed some concern and interest in learning more about the rise in petty crime in certain areas of the city. The other group that we reached out to meet with is formerly called the Grupo de Mujeres, and I apologize for my accent. They're recently renamed the Pili Group, and that meeting was not able to occur due to lack of space as a result of the pandemic restrictions. So this slide has bubbles, and the bubbles are indicative of the number of comments we received on each of these platforms. So in addition to hosting the 4 meetings that happened, of course, virtually, we also encouraged people to respond via social media in a variety of different ways. And we did hear from a lot of people in this format. So you can see across the screen that we received comments via Facebook, via Instagram, via the Nextdoor and the Neighbors app. We did have one person choose to use a virtual comment box that we provided on the website. And then we also received 6 comments via email, although it's 7 as of today. So we received a lot of feedback this way. In addition to recording the questions that were asked as part of this process, all comments that were provided in writing were also captured. And the report includes a sampling as well as a full appendix with all of the comments. So one thing I did want to share as part of this is, and I think the mayor mentioned it earlier on in his introduction, is that we had a lot of help as part of this process, and when able, we leaned on existing relationships. The example that I provided in the report was our volunteer coordinator, Jackie Conan, reached out to their database of volunteers to ask them to look at the process and see if they might be willing to engage. We also reached out to community academy graduates. Jennifer from the police department was instrumental in that. And then of course, our community engagement coordinator, Betsy, also did a lot of one-on-one and group outreach. So through those methods, we were able to reach a lot of people. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Steele for our key takeaways.
All right, thank you, Megan. Go ahead and take the next slide here. Just real quick, as I reflect back on this process, when you go into something like this, where you're opening yourself up to criticism, it can be a little unsettling, but I was pretty confident that it was going to be ultimately a positive thing for our department. It was going to give us an opportunity to listen to our community, hear what concerns they had, make modifications where we need to as a department, and then move forward and provide a better level of service. And that's ultimately what we're going to do. I have no doubt about that. The themes that we pulled out of that, we've narrowed it down to 6 quick issues that I'll walk through here. And none of them were honestly a real surprise to us. Some of them were ongoing issues that we've been working through, and some of them, present some challenges that are going to be a little bit more difficult than some of the other takeaways. But the first one here, for example, focuses on mental health and how do we better serve people when they're in crisis. And this is actually something that, again, that's been ongoing for quite a while now. And in fact, today I was just emailing back and forth with Washington County Mental Health and City of Tigard to keep efforts like this moving ahead. And our community is very fortunate. We have a number of resources available to us. We have a solid county mental health department. We have a urgent care walk-in center for people suffering from mental illness and crisis situations. We have a crisis intervention team that can respond 24 hours a day. We have a program with a mental health response team that pairs up clinicians and police officers and deputy sheriffs to respond to these types of situations. The biggest issue we have is making sure that we have those resources available to our community in a timely manner. So a lot of those resources are based sometimes in Hillsborough or other parts of the county. We just need to make sure that they're here locally. So again, this is something that we've been working through for a while, and we're trying to do our best to kind of speed this process up a little bit, to bring those resources a little bit closer to home here. And I think we're making good headway on that. And like I said, I was just actually emailing today about this. There's also discussions about what's known as the CAHOOTS model, which is a program that's been fairly successful in Eugene. A lot of those conversations are taking place now to see what it would take to make something like that happen here locally in our area. So it's a big topic. It's hugely important to our community and many others around us. And there are a lot of steps underway that we're going to continue to focus on to make sure that we're equipping our officers and our community to handle when situations like this present itself. Go ahead, Megan, number 2. So policies regarding using the least amount of force reasonable. So I will tell you, I've been a police officer in Oregon for 25 years now, and this has always been the way I've been trained, and I know our officers are trained this way as well. Number one, we want to avoid using any force if necessary, and if we can't do that, we always want to use the least amount of force. So this is a perfect example of making sure our policies match our training, and it's something that we probably just, I'm not going to say lost focus on. It's just something that we just assumed was in place because it's been so common for so many years on how we train police officers, not only around here locally, but in the state of Oregon. So this is a good example of some policy cleanup that we're working through. Our use of force policies, in addition to all the other police policies that we have, they're living documents. So we're always consistently updating them, changing them, whether it's based on case law or even a situation like this where we just need to make sure it's crystal clear. And he gives our officers a good reference to point back to if they ever need it. So this one is underway. I can tell you our policies just specifically about use of force have changed 3 times this year based on new laws that have come into place or cleanup like situations like this. So it's definitely on the forefront of things that we're working through. And I have no doubt in our next round of policy updates, we'll have something like this easily taken care of. Go ahead, the next one. So this one focuses again on policies and de-escalation. Prior to George Floyd, our policy manual referenced de-escalation in just a few areas. We've since corrected that and made sure it's prevalent through our policy manual. But again, de-escalation wasn't something new for the police department. It's something that it's been a common term that we've used for, I was trying to pinpoint it back to probably 2012, 2013 is when we really started to try to focus on de-escalation techniques. And it mainly comes back to dealing with people in a mental illness, a crisis situation, people that might be under the influence of a drug or intoxicant. So it wasn't a new concept for us, but again, we just need to make sure that it's solid in our policies. It's always been there, but it's in there more than it was in previous editions. All right, number 4. A lot of themes that we heard was making sure our officers have what they need to be successful, making sure that we're providing them the training to prepare them for these situations. So this one talks about recognizing when somebody is in distress. And while it's a basic concept that we train, we began an initiative back in 2019 to send every one of our police officers through an additional 40 hours of crisis intervention training. It's a little bit advanced level training. We're not fully through the department. I will tell you, we had to take a pretty big pause in 2020 with the pandemic. This class is hosted by Washington County Mental Health. Again, it's 40 hours. It's a hands-on training. So there's some classroom lecture, but there's some scenario-based training that comes along with it on how to interact with people that are suffering from mental illness. We actually bring in some from Washington County Mental Health. We'll refer and partner up with NAMI, the National Alliance of Mentally Ill. We'll send some people over to help our officers be better equipped to handle some of those situations. So there's scenario-based training that comes along with the classroom portion. Again, it's 40 hours. I'd say we're about halfway through the department now. Washington County just gave us an update 2 weeks ago that they're hoping to resume those classes towards the end of spring, first part of summer. So that's definitely something that's on our mind and we're working towards. The next one has to do with making sure our training is up to date about cultural awareness and racial bias. So that is something we do train our staff on. It's a topic of training at our state police academy. We probably need to spend a little bit more time in an area like this. It's a challenge to get officers the training they need. And an example of that is in Oregon, every officer in the state to maintain just a basic level of certification has to have 28 hours of training every year. And that includes use of force training, firearms training, mental health training, ethics training. And so there's a lot that comes on just maintaining that basic level of certification. So every time we try to enhance our training, it becomes a balancing act, making sure we still have people, patrolling the neighborhoods, responding to 911 calls, but then also getting them the training they need. So this is something we'll probably continue to focus on a little bit more in the future. It's going to be in addition to the crisis intervention training that we've had underway too. And the last one of the community members recommended more regular updates to the city council. So I'm always happy to talk to anybody that wants to listen to me about the police department. Some of the information that we could discuss, I presented in the past, specifically about the traffic stop data. Use of force data is information we already pull once a year to take a look at, but I'm happy to do that on a more frequent basis if that's what the desire is. And then reporting on officer misconduct as well. And I do want to make sure, especially the council and our community knows, we don't have a significant amount of officer misconduct. We definitely work through performance issues. None of our officers are perfect. I'm not perfect. There's always a better way to do something potentially. So whether it's something as simple as a supervisor kicking back a police report for additions, corrections, modifications, we're always paying attention to performance like that. Evaluations are completed every year with recommendations on how to do their job better. And then, there's times where, we might hire a person that just isn't meeting our performance standards, and we'll part ways with them and that's just ensuring we have the best people out there doing this job. So that's kind of the performance side of the equation. Misconduct. I'll tell you, I've been here a little over 4.5 years now. We gave one officer a little bit of time off unpaid for the damage to city property. I've issued another oral reprimand since I've been here, and that's it when it comes to misconduct. So we do not have a significant amount of misconduct by our officers, or let alone even allegations of misconduct. So it's something we definitely pay attention to. And so this in general is information that we can present. Like I said, some of it's just a matter of pulling the information. It just takes a little bit of time. So whether it's presenting once or twice a year, I'm happy to do that. Maybe we discuss that with the city manager and figure out what works best for you. And I think the next slide just kind of lists those 6 takeaways I just walked through. And so that was kind of the end of my presentation. So I'll just kind of turn it back over to the mayor and the council.
Thank you, Chief. If we can see everybody again. Thanks, Megan. So questions for Chief Steele and or Megan or myself? Council Brooks and then Council President Grimes.
Well, first of all, thank you, Mayor, for initiating this, and thank you, Chief Steele and Megan, for your leadership in facilitating the communications. I think I attended all of them except for the specific one for the diverse community. And I thought they were really informative, and it was a really good format. It was a really wonderful opportunity to learn. If anyone that's watching is interested and wasn't able to attend, I think that the webinar is available still on the website, and it would be really worth going to learn. And I am very grateful, and I think we're very fortunate to live in a city with such a strong, positive leadership and police force here. I feel fortunate to also serve on the Tualatin Community Police Foundation and have an opportunity to talk to Chief Steele at other times. I did want to mention, as far as the CAHOOTS model goes, as a social worker and a clinical social worker, I had the opportunity to see that model discussed at the National League of Cities Summit this last fall. And so it's getting national attention. The outline of it was put forth really clearly. I'm sure it can be tailored for different areas, but some of the things that I really liked about it is that it puts in collaboration community-based organization that specializes in mental health and works side by side. As a social worker, I've been in situations going to house visits where my safety wasn't safe, and we need police sometimes to support. This was back outside Detroit, and there's drug dealers happening and things like that when I'm doing children's visits. And at the same time, there's situations where we don't want somebody that's there to arrest and restrain somebody to be trying to be doing therapy and doing things that, that's not the field that they really got into. So I love the idea of the CAHOOTS model. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about with mental health is just, I've also been in situations of working with suicidal clients, and to know that 87% of gun deaths are due to suicide. So there's a lot of people that are armed, that are suicidal, that are successful. Actually, it's a much more successful way of committing suicide than all these other ways. And so just raising awareness around that's the kind of things that we're dealing with in our state. And our state is a little bit of an outlier. So knowing that there are tricky situations with mental health and de-escalation, and honoring that that's what we're dealing with. And at the same time, I feel really fortunate having a big caseload, never to have had anyone that committed suicide in my caseload. And I think there's ways of, having those people come through whole and alive, that are struggling. And then I have one question, and my question has to do with, because this whole thing was kicked off with George Floyd. And I talked to a friend that's been an advocate for a long time for the Black community and has written a book and all kinds of things. And the question that was posed to me that I would like us to consider is, why, for nonviolent crimes, how can we reduce taking people in for nonviolent crimes? And my other question is, how can we utilize things like looking up people's license plates and sending tickets versus so much contact with especially nonviolent offenders? And is that a direction that we're thinking about in going, Chief Steele?
Well, so I guess I can start talking about that in a couple different ways. So there are options to, obviously when it comes to traffic violations, there are potential tools in place. We already use it in the city for red light enforcement at intersections. There is opportunities to do that for speed. I'd have to brush up on all the requirements, but I think those laws just recently changed to give the jurisdictions opportunities to do speed enforcement in different parts of the city. So there are opportunities like that. So I'm not saying I'm a huge supporter of that right now. I would have to research that one a little bit more because, what might seem like an innocent traffic violation sometimes leads to more significant crimes, whether it's DUI or contacting of people that are committing crimes in neighborhoods. So there's a lot of moving parts to that. So I'm not going to commit myself to doing away with police officers conducting traffic stops tonight. But we're, like I said, even going into this whole process, we're pretty open to new ideas on better ways to do things. Traffic stops are a good way that police officers get killed every single year. And if there's something that we can do that makes it safer for our folks, we got to be open to that as well. So that has to do with traffic stops. Did you have part two to that question? I don't remember.
Well, no, I was thinking about George Floyd, passing. I wouldn't know if I had a counterfeit $20 bill in my hand, and I don't know if he knew or didn't know. But the whole start of that, and then, what looked to me like a lot of claustrophobia and things like that, it just was, in my mind, and a lot of people in the Black community that I've spoken with, what are these reasons for bringing people in for nonviolent crimes instead of ticketing and things like that? And is there a way that we can, and I don't know what our policy is in that particular instance, or if we have a lot of problems with things like that in Tualatin. But in that particular instance, and in instances to think about that are kind of like that instance, is there a way of doing a different kind of enforcement that's less of a physical situation and more of a fine or a ticket instead of this kind of a physical?
Yeah. So, the tricky part of that, when you get into the investigation of the crime, obviously you're going to have person crimes, you're going to have property crimes. One could be a little bit easier to address in the manner you're describing. Person crimes are going to be a little bit more difficult, but any crime you're investigating typically is going to have some type of victim. And so you're going to want to make sure we're factoring into, the victim's point of view on this. I can tell you that when we issue cite and lose to people, we don't take them to jail. They're given a court date to appear before a judge later. Their failure to appear rate is much, much higher And even if you take it to the next step for people that have been lodged in the jail, people that are held in jail and get the opportunity to see a judge, they are more likely to appear in court at a later date than people that aren't required to see a judge and are never booked into the jail to begin with. And unfortunately, a lot of those folks continue to engage in criminal activity. So it's kind of a repetitive cycle that doesn't seem to end. But I see what you're saying as well. Is there a better way to do that to avoid, that cycle that is potentially putting somebody in a situation where they're going to have to use force? So I agree with that. And again, we're open to a lot of new and creative things, but there are times, especially when we get into whether it's a domestic violence situation, restraining orders, there are a few times we're required by law to make an arrest. And even the people that don't go to court, they're ultimately going to have a warrant issued for their arrest. Those, again, are times where we're going to be required to make an arrest, whether we want to or not. So there's a lot of different factors that could come into play, but I definitely hear what you're saying.
Yeah, no, and I specifically said nonviolent crimes. So nonviolent crimes is what I'm talking about for sure. And thank you again for all the work and your strong leadership on behalf of our city. I feel very fortunate and safe when I live here. Thanks.
So it's Council President Grimes, then Maria.
Thank you. I had a question for Chief Steele, and I apologize if I missed this information somewhere in the presentation. It seems that the level of mental health and general well-being calls for police officers, for people in distress, and it could just be the way that it's being covered in the media, but it seems like those types of calls are somewhat on the rise, especially given the situations currently with COVID and the additional stresses that people are feeling with, finance, homelessness, you add it all together. Do we expect our individual officers to all have the same level of training and response techniques for like a mental health break or a call for someone that's in distress? Or do we have teams that we use that receive special training that we try to send out, or maybe from neighboring jurisdictions? That's my first part of my question. And then my second part of the question is, how can we help you as a chief and as a department? You mentioned the giant challenge that it is to get enough time for training for officers in an age where it feels like, policing is continually evolving and we need more training and more resources for our officers. How can we help you get to the point where it's not such a horrible challenge trying to rotate officers out for their regular training and then the additional training that these times require? Do we need an extra officer? If you could give us some direction on how we can help, I would appreciate that.
So I think you're pointing out key areas of concern in policing in Oregon. And so when I was hired in 1996, I went to the State Police Academy. It was 8 weeks long. We now send officers for 16 weeks to the Basic Police Academy. So the need for additional training has definitely grown over the years. So that's just to get through the police academy. And then I mentioned the required training. That wasn't always the case in years past. It is now. It's forcing us to provide training so that our officers are equipped to handle these situations. If we were able to figure out a different way to get these types of calls to different levels of service, we might not have to continually create new ways to train our officers to handle those situations. So we don't have teams of people that we can call on immediately. We have resources available to us throughout the area, but when you respond to a crisis situation, seconds matter. And if you're having to wait for a specially trained person to drive from Hillsborough to Tualatin on rush hour traffic, it's going to take some time, and that's what's working against us. So while we have some great resources available to us, they're not immediately available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So that's what's forced us to make sure our officers have adequate levels of training to handle those situations. It's not perfect by any means. And again, our officers do an outstanding job dealing with a variety of different subjects. I mean, they're forced to be at times a doctor, a mental health worker, a lawyer. I mean, they're wearing so many different hats, and that's what's kind of got us to the point we're in now, where we're kind of overwhelming them in some regard, and we've set that expectation of what they're able to do so high. It's a challenge. So I'm not going to say I need another officer to make sure that we get the training our officers need, but it does change. So the mental health training that is now required, it wasn't required a handful of years ago. Ethics training wasn't required a handful of years ago. It's not bad training. It's training we want our officers to have. But when you continually stack that additional layer of training every couple of years, it just becomes a challenge to continually meet that. So number one, I don't need a new officer just to provide training. It's taking that step back and looking at the system as a whole, which is exactly what this process was hoping to help identify. Is there a better way to handle people that are in crisis? Does it require a police officer to respond to every single one of those? And that's what we're working through. So I hopefully that answers your question. We've got resources available. They're not always right there when we need them. And when it comes to, what I need to provide the training for the officers, we probably need, as a society, a clearer understanding of what really we're expecting police officers to do in this day and age.
No, I agree. I completely feel for the officers, what they have to be from officers, counselors, grief counselors. I mean, my goodness, everything that they have to deal with, I just can't even imagine. And that's why I'm thinking, like, if we had someone by shift or someone by a localized team that we could get a couple of specialists to maybe help out, is that helpful? Or is that, again, moving you all in such a different direction from what your core task should be, that it's better to involve different outside agencies to help with these crises rather than try to make our own internal team?
It would definitely help. I mean, what we've basically done is we've put a Band-Aid on a problem and it's become a stopgap for a number of years now. The issue continues to grow, but we're not really digging too deep into how to solve the root issue. We're just trying to make a better Band-Aid that's going to last a little bit longer.
Well, I just want you to feel like that you have the council's full support. And if there's things that you need and resources that you need, I don't want to speak for everyone, but I know it on my part. I mean, I would be always happy to listen and always, happy to put the city's resources at your discretion to help with these challenging times, because I think that you all do a wonderful job, and whatever we can do to support you is very important to me, and I'm very grateful for the job you guys do.
And I appreciate it. And I will say our community as a whole has stepped up. I mean, like I said, we have access to resources, and I mentioned the Hawthorne Walk-In Center in Hillsborough is a tremendous resource that not very many communities have. The mental health response team with the clinician in the car with the deputy or an officer. I mean, just being involved in that from day one in 2010, that is a tremendous resource that we've been able to reap the benefits of over the year. And our community has stepped up whether it's a public safety, local option levy, countywide. I mean, that's what helps fund some of those services. So we want our community to continue to support that, but then make sure it's not always centrally located in Hillsborough or Beaverton. It's a little bit farther south too.
I believe Councilor Reyes is up next.
Thank you. Chief Steele, thank you for all that you do, and thank you for training, and always willing to learn and um, just learn about other cultures and your team. I think they're very open-minded. I attended one of the diversity, I think it was early last year when you came. Sorry, my cat just made a big noise. Sorry. And you came to one of our meetings and you had a lot of questions from the community, and you were so graceful and answering all the questions, and very truthful as well. I think that your work and the work of any police officer, it's really tough. And I think that a lot of people, because we're in Tualatin, sometimes, I mean, I've seen violence and I've seen crime and true criminals, so as well as victims. So I feel like your work here, it's really great. Some of the questions that people ask about, oh, how come we don't do this and do that and have that contact list? I think because we're in Tualatin, we haven't really seen a simple stop can save somebody's life that's inside a vehicle. An abduction, someone that's being raped or being abused or being, in that vehicle, and just a simple stop can save that person's life. I speak for someone that was in a situation like that, and it was a traffic violation that stopped that vehicle, from a cop stopped that vehicle to save my life, and that was, I will never forget that. And I'm from I'm talking about someone from the ghetto. I mean, I'm from the ghetto, and I'm talking about like the stuff these cops see out there. It's like, I mean, decapitation, body parts. I mean, I can get very graphic because it could be very graphic, and that's what they're dealing with. And sometimes we watch something on TV and we focus on that, and it could have done better. Obviously, it's sad. Things could have been better, and the police could have done things better. And it's sad that we don't have many lives out there because, some protocols were not done correctly. But the level of things that you see out there is just insane. I will go crazy. I don't know how you guys do it. Mentally, I will go crazy. So I really commend you and your team, and police officers are out there that are great and doing the right thing, because you do save people's life, and you're out there putting your life. And sometimes we don't appreciate that because the political focus or whatever's out there, it's just on one little thing. And sometimes we don't see the overall picture. And I really think that the training that you're getting, all that's going to improve, all that's going to help us, me as well, improve, like to learn what you do out there. I learned the hard way on how you guys do work out there because of what I saw and what I've seen throughout my life. And what you guys do here is really great. I mean, going to the community, meeting, serving the kids, talking to the families and all that, that's really helpful. So I think that's going to mend a lot of issues and tensions out there. And I think you're doing a great job. I think your team, and I wish a lot of departments like Tualatin, police departments like Tualatin would take that, like people would be more like your team, because you guys are amazing, and I'm always impressed by everything you do. And so thank you for being so open and willingness, and the willingness that you have to listen to the families, the communities, and be able to train your officers, and always looking for the improvement of the officers, because the officers want to protect themselves. So I think that you're also looking for that protection. So make sure that they're not in trouble, that they're handling things the right way. So thank you for doing that. And I really appreciate your work, and not just your work, but just the way you handle a lot of these questions they're hard questions. And I sometimes, when I've heard them, I'm like, how is he gonna answer that? And I'm always amazed of how you answer, and you're always pretty good about what you do and say. So thank you very much for your team and for taking your time to review these new protocols that hopefully would mend a lot of tension out there in the communities. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
I appreciate that. And I do want you to know, when this is all said and done, I typically will beat myself up a little bit and say, why'd I answer it like that? I should have said something else. But like I said, I know our officers are out there doing their best every day. They're not perfect, but they're doing a pretty good job taking care of our community.
All right, Councilor Sacco.
Thank you, Chief Steele, for all of your efforts and your work through the whole community conversations. I was able to join one of the sessions. I watched one of the sessions virtually, and then I did miss the last one. But it was very insightful, so thank you for that. So my question is, do you think after this process that those who did participate had a more favorable view of police in general, and those that maybe are hesitant to reach out participated less? So then is there an opportunity to continue outreach to a set of community members that maybe weren't comfortable reaching out through the community conversations to bridge that gap, to strengthen that relationship and break down some of those barriers? I know you talked about doing training for cultural awareness, things like that, but actually doing that outreach to those community members that maybe we didn't hear from through this process.
Yeah, so there is no doubt in my mind that, there were people that were involved in this process that were going into it, were heavily influenced by what they saw on a national level in the media or other parts of even our local area about how police departments operated. And they didn't really know how we operated as a police department here locally. So we were able to kind of work through some of those questions and concerns as a result of this process. 2020, though, I will say, has been the most challenging year for us when it comes to community engagement. We had to cancel, so many different types of community events that we would have had the opportunity to engage people, because it takes a lot to just say, okay, I'm going to reach out to my police department and ask a question. And we totally get that. But where we missed out was the community conversations that would have occurred at the regatta or the crawfish festival, where it's just casual conversations when we have a booth, we're standing there chatting with people, and people ask all kinds of wonderful questions at events like that. And we missed that last year. So I'm hoping as we continue to move past the pandemic and we can get back into the community and engage a little bit more, it will give people an opportunity that might have had a question or concern over the last, number of months. Maybe they'll feel a little bit more comfortable coming up and asking it in a different setting, as opposed to specifically just reaching out to the police department. That's our hope, that's our desire, and that's really why we do what we can to engage in so many different community events, is to give people an opportunity to ask questions and voice concerns.
Councilor Hilliard, then Councilor Pratt.
Hi, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief. As you know, we always appreciate hearing from you and getting to hear about the amazing things that your officers are doing. And in talking to community members who did participate in this process, I again want to reiterate their level of, at least from the people that I had the opportunity to interact with, an increased level of respect for you, your position, and our officers, and your willingness to be transparent and be vulnerable in this process. And I think that says a lot, continues to say a lot about you, Chief Steele, your department, as well as the city staff who is engaging everyone. And so to the mayor also, I think the questions that you asked were just ones that I certainly wouldn't have thought of, and I think the community benefited. So I think it was a great process. And I guess I would just love to point out that Councilor Reyes brings up such a great point about your first line of prevention in a lot of ways for a lot of different situations. On the I-5 corridor, reminding folks that this is a child trafficking corridor. There are a lot of different things that happen And I just want to keep that at front of mind. And I also noticed that several times people mention prevention in different ways, and why are you hiding, behind whatever? And it's like, oh my gosh, well, that's kind of the cat and mouse game sometimes. But I do really appreciate that the community sees you as a prevention resource. And I think that has a lot to do with your community outreach in different places. And I know at least stand-up kids love to hang out and get pictures at Starry Night and all sorts of different things. So we know you're out there and doing that. I would like to request, though, that we get to see in the reports that get added in some calls for service and different types of things, the number of calls. I think we'll all be very surprised at how many calls that you go on in different types. So I don't know if that's something that, Chief, that you can work with Sherilyn on and staff, but I think it would be great for our community to hear really how active things are and how many more times things are peacefully resolved than not. I think that would just add to the transparency. So thank you again.
Yeah, and I think that's another good example of, not everyone knows what goes on in our community on a daily basis. And while we live in a very safe community, and I mentioned this to Sherilyn the other day, that in 2020, in all of Washington County, there were 5 homicides. So we haven't had a homicide in town since 2018, when we actually had 2. But so all of last year in all of Washington County, we had 5 homicides. There were 55 in the city of Portland. So there's a lot going on in our metro area that fortunately we don't have to experience on a daily basis in our community. That's what we're doing. We're doing everything we can to prevent that. But there's a lot of things that go on every day, and it's not all criminal. I mean, we got officers that are performing CPR on babies. I mean, that's not fun, but that's part of the job. And then anything up from there. So there is a lot that goes on, and we're happy to try to share that information.
Councilor Pratt.
Hi, Chief Steele. I wanted to also thank you just for the Zoom meetings and just your willingness to take this on. I know it had to be difficult, and how well you responded to the pretty complicated questions people asked, and how thoroughly and how you were willing to use this like as a tool for improvement. But what I really wanted to ask, I know you come once a year in front of council, and I loved Councilor Hillier's idea of adding to that report, but I would also like the idea of you coming maybe twice a year or even quarterly, so we could be updated more often and see how you're doing.
All right, I think that's everybody. Councilor Brooks.
Sorry, I just feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't say one last thing. Just as far as I've been in the social work field for over 20 years, and I've watched and also lived in different areas. And there is so much that we've talked about in situations that are very difficult, and mental health showed up actually a few times on the different screens. And so I just want to say I've watched just moving to this area, the statistics here are worse for treatment for mental health issues and for letting people get to a place where they're decompensating, especially people with severe persistent mental health issues, and even those with episodic. We have high rates of depression and high rates of suicide in this state. And part of it's, in my opinion, I've seen my profession get decimated, and I've seen the lack of attention, especially since I moved to Oregon on this issue. So I want to keep those things in mind, and it trickles down. And I really don't think, and from what I heard you say, and I'm not sure, I don't want to misspeak, but I don't think that the officers necessarily want to be mental health caseworkers or therapists. And I would feel remiss if I didn't say anything. So thanks for letting me share twice.
All right.
I appreciate that.
Okay, with that, as part of that article that was in Tualatin Life, I said I would open the floor to the public for comments. And I understand Susan Nowak has a comment. You're muted, Susan.
Story of my life. Imagine me who likes to talk. Mayor, thank you for letting me speak, and to council, and especially to Chief Steele and his department. I came on the meeting tonight to hear the report because I only got to 1.5 meetings when they had them last fall. And I just have a comment to make. I was asked several weeks ago what I liked about living in Tualatin, and my first answer was because I feel safe. And at my age and being retired and a senior, it's very important to feel that way. It's important to feel that way at any age. But the fact that I can say that after, and I've lived here 20 years, and every year I have felt safe. I've had very few interactions with the police force other than when my car was broken into and when we had strange people walking on our street, and I did get a ticket for using my cell phone. And then I don't do that anymore. And unfortunately, I had to have called the department for a wellness check on a senior friend. But every time I had an interaction, it was so respectful and so professional that it does make you feel safe. And in my world now, in my senior world, I hear from other seniors how comfortable they are and safe. And a lot of us still live alone, and not always in a particularly safe neighborhood, maybe, but they feel safe. And in my business world, with the chamber, we hear from our business members that it's okay to be here and do business in town because we have this support. And when the foundation shows up and does their thing and supports the department, I just want to thank the city for having the wherewithal to have Chief Steele and our police force here and to hire them. But from me personally, and maybe a little bit I represent the community, I can just say thank you publicly for a job well done. And I'm very sure it'll continue to be that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Bates, is there anybody in the poll center that might want to be heard, or?
No, Mayor. It's just
It's
Megan and I.
All right. Well, with that, I believe I'd suggest two motions. One, to accept the report, and two, my request would be, if council is okay with it, is for Sherilyn and Chief Steele to sit down and come back with an action plan in those 6 items and a timeline on how we can meet some of those strategies and objectives. I know these are ongoing, the chief is doing it, but I think having a date certain on some of these things, or just seeing what the plan is to fulfill those requests from the community. And also, as Councilor Hillier said, those items that we might want reported out to us either semi-annually or quarterly, so the community is aware of what's going on in the city. And as well as, one of the things that we didn't talk about that didn't pop up that much was, one of the suggestions was to have some of those crime data on the city's website that's easily retrievable, not have it be buried inside of a council report or the minutes of a council meeting, that a new page is thrown up that has, the most recent crime stats. So those are 2 things I'd be looking for as a motion, if someone would like to do that.
I'm so moved. I'll make a motion.
I think Sherilyn just had her hand up for a second.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Oh, so moved. I make a motion to accept the community conversations on police use of force policies report, and to ask Sherilyn and Chief Steele to come together and bring a strategy to council. Objectives.
I have a motion and a second. Do I have any conversations? Got a conversation in my head. Any comments on the motions? Any questions on the motions? Sherilyn?
Yeah, let me just chime in really quickly. And say that the chief and I will get together and come up with something to bring back to you. But I want to say thank you to the mayor and all of the council for your leadership on this issue. And I feel so proud of our department and Chief Steele in particular for all of the things that you said. We've watched other communities go through a series of these conversations in different ways, and many councils have had community members come to council meetings and express negative reactions to the police department. And we have not experienced that on a very regular basis. Community members come to the police department and drop off food and support and gift cards and things that tangible shows of support. And it makes me feel very proud of our police department and the relationship work and the community work that the police department has put into the community. So again, thank you for your leadership in this process, and thank you to Chief Steele and the department for going through it and for being the best that you can be.
All right. So I have a motion and a second, but I see Councilor Pratt's hand is up.
Can we add in to increase the frequency of Chief Steele coming to council and giving reports?
I think that was going to be part of the work plan.
Okay, that's fine.
Suggestion, we can always tweak it from there. That was my assumption.
Okay.
Yeah, that was mine too.
Yep. Okay, so I have a motion and a second. So I'll go through the roll here. Councilor Pratt.
Aye.
Councilor Sacco.
Aye.
Councilor Hillier.
Aye.
Councilor Brooks.
Aye.
Councilor Reyes.
Yes.
Council President Grimes.
Aye.
The chair votes aye also. Again, thank you. As Cheryl mentioned, thanks, Chief. I know you had several of your staff helping you out. I always give lots of props and shout outs to Megan here. Megan was integral in helping us put this together. Quite a few meetings between myself, Megan, and Sherilyn, and I think it worked out well. And going to the point of Councilor Sacco, I hope the conversation continues, that if folks do have issue with the police department, that they do not fear having to talk to someone or send a suggestion in or an email. That you can see Chief Steele is very open to suggestions or wants to know if there's something going awry. If anyone in the community feels that way, you can talk to any of us or approach Chief Steele. Go to the person in charge if you want, and have it looked into if you think there was something done wrong or you feel you were dealt with unjustly. So thank you again for everybody's effort on this, and I think we should be pretty proud of what we did. We're one of the few communities in the area that did it. So thank you to all.